Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We are Alia and Co. This is the podcast where we talk about complex things and we make them easy. My name is Alia Kizelbash, and I am your host. And today's topic is perception. Perception, basically, it's like how you view yourself and how others view you. And there are so many ways that we can perceive ourselves where others are perceiving us in a completely different way. I mean, think about filters. I mean, this is our everyday. You may think you need a filter. Others may think that you don't. I mean, but also social media. A lot of times we're posting things and, it's the highlight reel of your life. And you might have just had a fight with your spouse and you don't know, It could extend to basically going to school and seeing that perfect mom who's dressed so well, taking all of her kids, 5 kids, to every sporting activity. And she's completely organized and just has it all put together. But she's like severely depressed and she's exhausted and she's anxious. And these are the things that we just don't see. But even more serious than that, how about being the only person in the room? The only person that might be a woman or a minority or the youngest in the room or the oldest in the room or socioeconomically. I mean, you might be somewhere where basically, you're feeling it. You're feeling the divide when it comes to wealth. And the thing is that this could happen in school, this could happen in professional settings, but we never really know. And so we have an amazing guest here today, Don Bora. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Don has an amazing kind of track record when it comes to perspective. And I would say that he is an excellent person to have here today. He is a 9-time co-founder. So he understands the perception when it comes to business and, also just grinding it out through that. But not just that. I mean, he also advises and mentors people that are minorities and women in these spaces as well. I mean, companies as well, but you lean towards wanting to be able to provide these kind of insights that you've experienced in your 9 times to these individuals. But outside of that, he is also a proud father to a transgender son. And really, that journey has definitely shaped the way that he perceives, advocacy and empathy. And so, Don, have I left anything out? I would love to. I mean, you do a lot of things. So I'd love to.
I was going to say, could you do my eulogy?
Oh, no.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's, a very impressive track record. So I think that I just want to start with how we're going, since we are talking about perception. I mean, has there been a time in your life where you have been labeled or misunderstood in any way?
Wow. I mean, yeah. So when I was in grade school, in grade school and high school, I was just an underachiever. So just terrible grades. I know everyone.
Why would you say that?
Well, it's because it's true. It's like you could just.
What's an underachiever?
Well, somebody who could probably do it, but who couldn't make grades. I just couldn't do it. And I tried a lot, which kind of for me, and I internalized. I just felt like I was dumb because I was trying as hard as I could, but I still couldn't make the grade. Mm-hmm. I mean, I barely got out of high school. I barely got out of college. And when I got out of college, so there were some recruiting firms that looked at my transcripts and went, no, that's not, we can't represent you. So, that, I guess, being misrepresented as, through the system of what the school was back then, what really broke that cycle for me was I in college, I studied in Europe. I studied in Germany for a year. Mm-hmm. Now, I was a solid D- student in German throughout high school, throughout college, and I just ended up wanting to study there on a whim. My best friend from college was going. He's like, come with me. And at first I was like, you're crazy. And then my dad said he'd pay for it. So I was like, well, I can't not do that. Oh. So I went, and remember the solid D- track record. I became fluent within 6 months. And I mean accent and everything.
That's amazing. That's a language. That's hard.
That's, I don't think it is hard. It's very mathematically, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
How does language make sense mathematically? That's interesting.
In German, because of the way the tenses and the sentence structure. The sentence structure is very English came from German as far as sentence structure goes. But a lot of the tenses and endings on words, they're very mathematical. Like you memorize like 20 or 30 rules, and you've kind of got the grammar down, more or less.
Is there like, okay, an example, to run, like if
You're going to ask me to speak German with dry mouth. All right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I just try to understand the math because this is the first I'm hearing that. And so like, and because I know, for example, in Farsi, there is no masculine and feminine.
Okay.
And so it becomes an easy language, I would say, to easier. I mean, definitely vocabulary. In English, you're still learning new vocabulary all the time. There's so many different words, but, I think that if you understand the basics, it's if you don't have to do the tenses, right? I mean, and also just the masculine and feminine, right. It becomes a little bit easier to pick up the language, which actually, as I'm realizing this, gosh.
It may not, actually, because of the context.
Interesting.
You've got to pick up so much more of the subtleties of the context to get the gender and the tenses, right?
Well,
maybe, I don't know. I mean, you're coming from
the
that
subtleties,
as a native, right?
But that's interesting, though, that the subtleties in that, yeah, perhaps. Well, I mean, like that's interesting. And I'm not like, I am ethnically, but not like, I didn't speak Farsi growing up. So
you probably speak more languages than I speak.
No. But what's interesting though, if it did exist, and I know that we're talking about, and later on we're going to delve into your son and we're going to talk about that. But pronouns, in a language where you don't have like, a masculine or a feminine, I mean, what an interesting concept, Yeah. But getting back to you in terms of, your language, you mentioned that you went to Germany and you picked up the language really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I really, really worked hard at it, but it just clicked while I was there. Mm-hmm. And when I came back, I still couldn't crack a B. And my fellow students who couldn't really speak that well were acing classes. And I was just like, oh, come on. What's going on here?
What was it?
I don't know. I could tutor. I tutored kids. I could speak like effortlessly with my professors. It was the wildest thing. But I'll tell you this. One of the things that I did, and this is probably the downfall, one of the things that I did when I was in Germany was the people that spoke it accent-free and very fluently that were foreigners, I would listen to them and I could tell when they were making grammar errors. But I listened to how they were making the errors. And then I would listen to native speakers make the errors. And so I started to duplicate their errors.
Oh.
So when I came back, I was probably doing that a lot, like duplicating the errors.
Interesting. So you weren't learning the nuances from, that's actually like, when you have like, I have a second child. And so the first one just is very hand to mouth type situation where it's like, I see a ball and I'm going to reach for it. Yeah. The second child comes along and it's like, oh, I see a ball. How am I going to get it so that this other one doesn't notice that I'm going after it? Right. So it's an interesting kind of methodology to kind of learn to make the mistakes from, the experts. Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
And we do it in English all the time. Yeah. And, like everybody misuses whom, everybody misuses he and like to him or, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But if you can do it well, then it sounds like you're a native speaker.
Right, exactly.
So, it's all that to say is like, did I ever feel misrepresented? I mean, yeah, I kind of felt like an idiot for like a large part of my childhood until that kind of clicked. And when it clicked for me, and then I came back to the U.S. And I was studying computer science at the time, and I added linguistics on because I had all the college credits. All of the higher order math and computer science topics clicked as well when I came back because I realized like a level of abstraction had been made. I've been made aware of that at a conscious level.
Right.
And all of a sudden I was like, oh.
I like that. No, and that's so interesting because, especially in the world of today, I mean, a lot of kids have attention deficit disorder, and some take medication, some don't. But the thing is that when a child, especially like a lot of young boys, like it's hard for them. I mean, my son, like he had some struggles with being able to focus and pay attention. And it's like, when they take medication, if it happens that you're taking a medication, it's like maybe your entire life you never knew what it was like to really focus. And what they say is that sometimes with this medication, they don't really need it even long term. it just kind of helps them understand what their capabilities are if you've never really focused, right? So it kind of like creates that muscle memory.
Yeah.
And so, it was kind of just, it's an interesting thing because like, even with my son, like the first time he took, and I was like, I did not want to, but when a kid is like, not doing well in class, it really, your self-esteem really suffers, I
Oh
think.
yeah. Oh
Yeah, because it's like I'm working so hard. I'm working harder than everybody here, and it's upsetting. It's it doesn't feel good. It's like no matter what I do, I'm still
Although I would say that, looking back in hindsight, I kind of feel fortunate that back when I was a kid, nobody knew anything
mhm.
and they didn't try to figure out like accommodations or anything like that
Yeah,
because I figured it out for myself
right.
and I think I got resilience from that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everyone would be able to do that or
Mhm.
everyone's dialed into that frequency,
Mhm.
but for me, I was. And I'm
Right.
like, well, I wonder what it would have been like if my parents had got accommodations for me or if I got, X, Y, or Z or if I were on medication. I have no idea. But
Right.
all I can do is look back and go, yeah, a lot of this sounds familiar to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, it's definitely. I think that there is almost too much information out now. And it's so hard to choose. In terms of, I mean, and even with the schools now, they're offering all of these kind of like services and pullouts and and whatnot. It's interesting, but yeah, but as you were mentioning, getting back to your story, with you went to Germany.
Yeah. And I came back
Mhm.
and had that revelation. And I think that's probably the biggest time in my life where I've felt misrepresented. I mean, everything else is, small, uh, I guess, stereotype thinking.
Yeah.
When people think, oh, I'm talking to a coder, because I identify myself as a coder primarily,
Mhm.
professionally. They think nerd, which is not inaccurate.
Mhm. It's okay to be a nerd, I
I mean,
think.
that's kind of the deal right now, right? And it's funny because the way I present myself, I present super liberal, and some of that's not wrong, but some of that, is wrong.
Mhm.
And I've had people make assumptions about me that, I remember one time I was talking to my boss. I was working at Bank of America, and I happened to mention Spider-Man.
Mhm.
It would just come out. And I loved it, and he was just like, "Oh, really?" And I'm like, what did you assume about me that I wouldn't be into that
Yeah.
a popular thing? And so it's been a very odd journey the whole time, right? Thinking that I was kind of like this dumb kid and then kind of having my whole perception
Mhm.
reoriented and reframed
Mhm.
by learning a foreign language and living outside the country, coming back and internalizing all that and then kind of getting out into the workforce and have swirling around these identities
Mhm.
of, nerd or coder
Mhm.
or whatever. And now I was just reading this really good article about identities and identity mapping, and I have so many identities now that
Mhm.
none of it phases me anymore.
Yeah. And I think having a lot of identities is really great. I think sometimes there's that kind of, I hear it in the startup world all the time where it's like, you need to be laser focused. And so what do you think of that? Because I think that certainly in life we live to experience.
Yeah.
Tell us about these identities and how that's kind of shaped, and kind of your perception.
Yeah, I guess on the laser focused thing, I mean, I look, a lot of founders I know are not laser focused.
Mhm.
They are shiny ball people.
Yeah.
And and honestly, if you're a shiny ball person, you just need to lean into who you are
Hmm.
because that's your strength, that's your superpower.
Hmm.
If you are a super focused person, great, be a super focused person. Don't get distracted purposely. You know what I mean? So
Right.
whatever your natural setting is, that's where you're gonna shine, and
Mhm.
that's kind of your advantage.
Right.
I mean, I identify as a business owner, an entrepreneur, a, a, a dad, a husband, um, a linguist, a lover of languages. Um, I'm sure I said nerd several times. So coder, technologist,
Hmm.
and what I've come to realize with all these identities is that I can pretty easily step into any situation
Hmm.
and not be intimidated by what's in front of me.
Right.
So, even as a business owner, I can walk into a room full of very high-powered CEOs and be totally cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes a lot to get to
Oh
that,
yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah.
to experience that over and over and see that, hey, you know, we're breathing the same air here, you know.
Right.
But it's interesting that you mentioned identities. I know in terms of like, you know, the ones that you're, you know, being a father and a technologist and a husband and all of these, like, you know, the ones that are close to our hearts, right? But then, you know, you might get sometimes like you have labels. Labels are different than I think identities. It's perhaps maybe what we perceive of someone else could be potentially a label
I was going
versus
to
an
say,
identity.
yeah, I was going to say, I think an identity is something you hold. A label is something someone gives to you.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then so you have like these labels like you know, tech guy, I'm sure you've
Oh
gotten
yeah.
or like, you know, like a founder or whatever, you know, but even kind of like, you know, as getting and we'll again talk about DEI also a little bit later. But then also being kind of like, you know, a male in a power position, you know, having a certain race that might be, you know, do you feel as though, and not that like, you know, I think that um we get clumped in sometimes, you know, especially if someone doesn't know you. Are there times, and you know, and you don't have to answer this. It's a kind of I feel like my feel a little, I don't
How can I
know.
not answer this? I'm here.
Well, like you know, have you experienced that? Like, I mean, are there times where by default it's like perhaps maybe you've seen in your lifetime that you might have gotten chosen over someone else that you know, perhaps maybe wanted that position or maybe you watched it happen in front of your very eyes where someone was overlooked because and it's not always explicitly said, right? I think that it's like kind of like, you know, that being the only person in the room situation, right? Where it's like it's not explicitly said, you feel like the only person in the room. They will never say it, but you feel it, you know?
I mean, look, if we're gonna go to labels and you know and put me at the center of labels, very rarely is a pejorative label. Do I feel like a label is pejorative? Like you said, I've got all the things. Like I've got, you know, old white guy, leader, tech. Like those are all the things. And if you're gonna come at me with a pejorative label, I'm struggling to think of what that would be unless it's an outright insult.
Right.
But on the hiring front, like you mentioned, I don't think I've ever been. I don't feel like I've ever been in the position where I benefited from that. I don't think. I don't know for sure. Only because I've lost out on so many different things. Because I'm just an average coder. I'm not. No. Seriously, I'm not. I'm not like amazing or anything like that. I'm the guy who likes to make the product good enough to ship.
Okay.
It's not going to be clever. It's going to be maintainable.
Right.
It's not going to be, oh my God, this is the best thing in the world. It's gonna be a product, and you're gonna be able to sell it. Like that's my speed.
Yes.
And I'm sure, like in fact, I had an old boss of mine. We're out for lunch, and I said, you know, I've never considered myself like a really good coder. And he laughed, and I'm like, no, really. Like I only like I make it good enough. I'm a good enough kind of coder.
Right.
And that's 90% of the world needs that mentality. So I don't think, based on that, I don't think I've ever like been chosen over anybody else because, if anything, people have been chosen over me because I look less qualified, which is fine. But I want to say on the other side of that, hiring-wise, I've made a very conscious effort to make sure that that never happens on my watch.
Yeah. Yeah. But though I feel like maybe there was like a certain impetus to be able to, like, you know, it is, if there is someone that is a person of color or someone like, you know, a woman in that space, I mean, you're inclined to want to, and you like helping, you know, those individuals because they're marginalized, right? How did that happen? Like, how did that, I mean, there must have been something that lit the fire where it's like.
Yeah, I've been asked this a billion times. Going back to like, quote, helping, I want to be very clear about this. Like everyone who's been hired under my watch is qualified for the gig. And I firmly believe that. What I do is I tilt the scales in their favor, and then I just kind of let the team take it from there. So I'll bubble somebody's name to the top, or if I'll bubble them to the top of a phone screen. If they get by me, they get to talk to the team. You know, some people had trouble with that, and I really didn't care because the team would not pass this person if they didn't pass muster. I'm not necessarily trying to, quote, help. I'm trying to, quote, unlevel the playing field so that people who've been at a disadvantage are at least at the same level as somebody else, if not have a slight advantage.
Right.
And that's kind of been my MO for maybe like the past 15 years. And you asked how it started. That's right. And I don't know. I've been like this for decades.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was a kid, I was like, this is going to get me in trouble probably, but I was a little socialist as a kid. Like I would take my sister's money and my money and we'd dump all the coins out on the bed and I would evenly distribute it. Like,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yes.
and my dad,
That's also being the sibling, right?
and I'm the oldest, and my dad being in finance would look at this and just like lose his mind. Like, what are you doing?
That's awesome, though. I mean, like, but she was compliant, was she?
Who was
Your
compliant?
sister?
Both of them. I mean, they didn't. They probably had no idea.
They're
what was
too
going
little to
on.
know.
I was just like, let's divide this stuff up.
Oh.
So I mean, I don't know why, but my brain has always kind of been like tilted that way. My mom was mostly a stay-at-home mom, and we got to a certain age where I'm like you can go work. I'm fine. We got this. Like I got I can take care of things, and we'll do we were old enough,
Right.
and so she did. I don't know what made me so vigilant on that. I really don't. I'm kind of glad I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's really nice to be able to lean into who you truly are. I think a lot of people sometimes they live lives where they're pushing against kind of like this wall, right? Where it's like, I'm trying to be somebody that you just don't feel that you are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think in many capacities, I think that a lot of people do experience to some degree. But I'd love for you to talk about perhaps maybe, and because I know you're a 9-time co-founder. I mean, you've had a lot of experience 9 times. But the thing is that the first time you were a founder compared to this past last time, what do you think has shifted in terms of you as a founder? In terms of kind of what you see of yourself, anything shift completely your insights as to how to kind of operate that kind of that journey?
Yeah, I love that question because it's something I've thought a lot about lately. So let me start at the present. So right now, my co-founder and I are essentially building products for founders and owners, and it's the first time that I've been able to walk into a room with like a legit CEO who's got an idea for a product and not feel like I don't belong there. But if you wind the clock back to the first company I ever started, which was about 25 years ago, I had none of that credibility and none of that, confidence. I didn't walk around with unearned confidence. A lot of people gave it to me because I was tech, I was white, I had a ponytail, I had all the signs, right? And I always felt like a little pressure of like, oh gosh, I hope I can live up to these weird expectations of me. But I think that honestly, what's changed is 25 years of living and just listening. And I'll tell you what, one of the biggest things that happened to me was at my current company. We've been around for about 16 years. That's 8-bit. And I was the one to push for 360 reviews. Dumbest thing I've ever done because they were awful. Like they were awful back at me.
Okay.
Right? And I was just like, oh God. And they were anonymous. So I couldn't like get any kind of real feedback as to what I should change.
Right.
But I would get the overwhelming vibe was that's just Don being Don. And I was like, oh, that doesn't sound good. So I got myself into therapy, like right away. And because we were growing and I'm like, I can't be that person. I can't be unapproachable. I can't be, people can't fear to come up to me or else none of this works. So I got myself into therapy. And then what I did a few years ago is I went and got a coaching certificate. So those two things right there, plus a very conscious effort to develop empathy over the years, has like really strengthened that maturity and empathy and was it emotional intelligence to where I think the reason I'm not intimidated anymore is because I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah.
And that overrides any like anxiety or fear.
Oh, absolutely. I think that especially when you talk about emotional intelligence, it's one thing to perceive this emotional intelligence on other people, right? If somebody's upset, you want to notice it. Even, I mean, having like a business related conversation, there's certain nuances. If somebody feels uncomfortable about something, you can tell, right? But then also, it's really important to know yourself, right? Some people are not emotionally aware of themselves. They're feeling upset, but they don't know why,
I mean,
right?
look, that's me 10% of the time,
Yeah.
let's say.
I mean,
we're all
but
human.
yeah, we're all human,
Yeah.
but I think that self-awareness certainly like plays a massive role, in this whole, space. But so do you think that like people that perhaps maybe like that are reactive or, within these spaces of entrepreneurship, you mentioned the 25 years that you have experienced in life, you know, I think the best thing is to be able to have that understanding, like you mentioned, that I knew I needed to get help. I needed to whatever review it was. It wasn't like you were like, oh nope, I'm not that. How dare you say that? It's something that. So do you feel like maybe that's something that has also isn't just the journey, but also that level of readiness to be able to be acceptant that hey, I made a maybe I'm not feeling, maybe I'm not navigating life the way that I should or that
yeah.
other people see
Yeah,
me.
for sure. Because what I realized when I was getting that feedback, what I realized is that I wasn't, when I first got into therapy and started working on all this, I realized that I wasn't, um, I started to know when I reacted badly.
Mm-hmm.
And it was when I was backed into a corner
Mm-hmm.
and expected to have an answer now.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? When you own the company, that's your job.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're standing in front of 50 people, 50, 60 people that want an answer
Mm-hmm.
now,
Right.
that's your job.
Mm-hmm.
And if something goes sideways and they want to know what you're going to do to fix it, like it's constant, it's never ending. And I realized that was my kryptonite,
Yeah.
being backed into a corner or feeling like I was being backed into a corner. And, and it was just fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
And then the adrenaline spike and then the protectiveness and the defensiveness,
Yeah.
would all could just come up and start to force people back.
Do you think before that realization, you were like, I need to be X to be taken seriously?
No, probably not. I deflected with humor, and it was probably maybe borderline abusive humor. Like me saying something that might be hurtful or offensive.
Yeah.
Without even knowing it or remembering it
Mm-hmm.
in some cases.
Yeah. Interesting. So now when you look at this like whole entrepreneurial sort of space, considering the 9 lives that you've had
Now
as
it's
a
starting to feel like a
co-founder.
lot.
But like, do you think that, you're supposed to, that idea of being a successful founder, there's like is there a label or kind of like a perception of what that should look like?
I mean, you and I have talked about this,
Yeah.
the whole what successful is. Every time and we were when we were on Zoom the other day and you said successful, I kind of like rolled my eyes a little bit internally
Yeah.
to myself because I don't know what that measure is. And I think everyone's measure of success is different. And I think if my peers look at me,
Mhm.
I'm probably successful to almost successful, depending on which peers I'm talking to,
Mhm.
because I'm not wealthy. And
I'm going to push back.
Okay,
Because
all right.
what is enough?
Right, well,
You
yeah.
know?
And well, I think enough versus wealth.
Mhm.
There's two different cases there, right?
So how your net worth should be X amount? What to be considered wealthy?
Well, I think no. Remember, it's not wealthy; it's successful, right?
Oh, I see.
So, how much wealth do you need to be considered successful? And I don't think there's a line.
Right.
I was just listening to Scott Galloway interviewed on Trevor Noah's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The dude's a billionaire,
Yeah.
and he's like, it's never enough.
Yeah.
That was part of his life. It was never enough. Now, right now, where I'm at in my life right now, very happy.
Yeah.
Very happy. I
Yeah.
don't need X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And in fact, I always told my mother-in-law, I said, look, if I'm driving a fancy car,
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing extremely well because the car is on my last priority item on my list.
Oh my gosh. And I think that that's the optics of that, right? Like most people think that you need to have a mansion and a Ferrari, a blah, 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 to be considered wealthy.
Right, exactly.
But recently I saw something where I think it was is the CEO of Apple or something like that was with somehow a sports, like a basketball player or something like that. And they looked at his watch and his shoes and the cost of that compared to like the $50,000 watch that the basketball player, and you should buy things you like. If something makes you happy, you should do it. I think it's a subjective case. Everybody, likes different things.
You do you.
You do you, exactly. But his shoes were also like, he's just wearing like a very comfortable, Nikes or whatever. And then the other guy was, of course. So it's like, you look at what it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so like when it comes to kind of like that mold of what wealthy should look like or successful should look like, but let's not say success. Let's just say kind of even acceptance or being able to sit at a table, in the right room when it comes to business, that mold of what that kind of not fitting in, what does that look like for women or people, kind of minorities or, anybody?
Well, I think it's less about being like sitting at that table and more about being invited to that table.
Mm-hmm.
Because getting that invite, getting in that circle of recognition to be validated and allowed into the circle to begin with, like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Once you've made it there, of course, that's a whole different mind. I almost swore. See, I almost swore.
You can, please do. Please swear. But mind fuck, let's just say it.
Thank you. All right, we broke the F-bomb. Thank you.
Yeah. So, but it is, so being invited to the table. So if you, how do you get invited to the table? It's kind of perpetuating kind of like the cycle where if you haven't been invited to the table because of your appearance or your youth or your differences, how does one, and that's where when the DEI comes in, how does one, where does it all begin? Tell us what you think that everybody should know.
Oh, God. I have not figured this out, and I am not the expert on this, but I will tell you some things I believe and some things I think I understand. So I believe that if you have a diverse identity map about yourself, that you will naturally network with people who have things in common with those identities. So, for instance, I identify as a business owner, and I belong to the Executive Club of Chicago. Okay, so the Exec Club is populated with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. Accenture's got a big thing in there. Baker Tilly's got a big cohort in there. All these big companies do. But there's a small group of us who are entrepreneurs. And I naturally was invited. And I think one of the reasons I was invited was because I am an entrepreneur. When I go to these events, I tend to gravitate towards the people that are doing their own thing. So I really think having multiple identities that you're comfortable with and that are public and known will allow you to mix with different groups of people and get you invited to things.
Right.
Now, easy? I have no idea. I've been at this for so long, right? But I think the world is a little different right now than it was, 25 years ago as far as that stuff goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely. And I think that, you and I, had I not been looking for someone technical, I don't think that I would have ever maybe met you, Yeah. So I guess perhaps maybe is that what you're saying is that what you're looking for, in terms of networking or friendship, I think, it extends socially too. It's like you're the kind of people that you gravitate towards and the kind of things that you want. Eventually, they come into existence in your space. But then where does the opportunity become kind of unequal?
Well, yeah. I guess, yeah. I guess we can look at technology, where technology is dominated by people like me, probably. I think it's probably safe to
Silicon
say
Valley.
maybe not even Silicon Valley, maybe just in broad terms. And getting a seat at the tech table is even difficult for me. I don't skew, I'm too old, for instance. So I don't skew in the age demographic, or like people are considering me current or like worth talking to on some of the tech stuff.
That's so interesting, though, because
It's bizarre, right?
for someone that is a technologist, no matter what age, right? I think there is a certain amount of relevancy. Well, at least the assumption. Here's the stereotype from the
Right.
lay perspective. I would say is that I would assume that somebody that is a technologist doesn't stop knowing about technology.
But there's two ways to look at that, right? We all know people who are aging in their fields who basically just like are comfortable where they are and they just stop and they're good. I've known a ton of people in tech that like, they get to 50 and you know what, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to sit here and ride out my retirement wave. That's never been me, but nobody would know that.
No, you're right.
You know?
Actually, there was a time I think I was a bio major in college, and there was a talk by I don't know which one it was, but Watson and Crick, the people who discovered DNA.
Yeah.
But one of them was still, I don't know if he's still alive. It's a while ago, but like. But the thing is though, like, it was so interesting. They interviewed him. It was at the Science and Industry Museum, and there was like a talk. So I went, and they were like, "Don't ask current questions." They're like, "Just don't." Ask about that model. Then do not ask questions about the future. All right.
Yeah.
And actually now it makes sense. And so clumping a techie into, and I wouldn't say aging techie. I think that still, it's like if your mind is active and you're ready and you're still discovering things and creating things, then I think that it's a person is extremely layered,
Yeah. Right.
You need to know kind of like, so, but that's interesting. So you're mentioning ageism is something in your space.
Well, it's something I think I've felt. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So think, what do you mean by that? Like, why do you think, do you think that there's a look in someone's eye?
No, I think there's a tone in someone's voice.
Oh, okay.
And it's, I've talked about this a few times, and I'm just not sure if I'm being like if I'm just afraid of it and becoming like hypersensitive to it or inventing it in my mind. I haven't discovered which yet, but I'll be like, if I get on a call, let's see, if I get an issue with our bank account, right? So I think we've got, I don't know, like 6 accounts with Chase. Shout out to Chase. And if there's a problem with either, onboarding our CFO, getting the CFO in there was a nightmare. Calling in and then thinking, oh my God, they think I have a problem with the website.
Oh gosh. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I have to lose my shit.
Yeah. But the thing is, I will say, so, okay, first off, when I am around younger individuals, that I'm, talking to or wanting to hire, but even quote unquote successful younger people who perhaps might be in tech, there are a lot of things that are missing there, the social skills, specifically in this day and age. I think that those are kind of missing to some degree, and I think, do you think that maybe at every age we kind of like look at people, be like, hello, you could learn something about this?
Yeah, I think every age has an opportunity to do that.
Right.
I don't think that we in this country encourage that.
Yeah.
It's still somewhat stigmatized.
Yeah.
Like, I'm very open about the fact that, I go to therapy. I think everyone should. It's just like going to the gym for your mind.
Right.
And yet I still get a little like sideways glance from certain generations that look at me and go, yeah, what was up with your childhood? And I'm like, you really want to know?
Let's talk about those traumas now. Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, definitely. And of course, we all come from certain upbringing environments to be able to kind of like, and to your point about the web thing, everybody is using all of the apps, all of these kind of new technologies that are out, but they also don't understand how any of it works.
Yeah. And yes. Yeah. And even like, this is probably a dad thing, but when my son graduated, and he graduated right during COVID, it was like the worst for him. And he and I were sitting at a table, and he was complaining about his laptop being slow. And I was like, I can take a look at that if you want. And he looks at me and goes, what are you going to do? And I was like,
excuse you.
This put that through college.
I know, exactly.
Come on.
Oh my gosh. So, that is hilarious because again, it's like, and so there's a saying in Urdu, it's like, and this is going to not translate very well, but it's like, the house chicken is like eating lentils or that didn't translate, but I'm saying is that if like, whatever, if someone in your house is super important or whatever, in some, like, for example, my father-in-law, he's a geotechnical engineer, right? He builds dams, the grouting for these dams. And it was really funny because there was a leak in our house and my mother-in-law was like, do not touch that. Let's get a professional. It's like, what? I was like, whoa, okay. So what I'm saying is that, like, very similar. I think that there is an aspect to that is like, but I think that we're all it's a sad state that we're in sometimes. At least people are not wanting to understand.
Well, and that's part of, like, you talk about working on yourself consistently. Like that's one of the things that I'm becoming conscious of is like, all right, well, is this really an ageist thing or am I just inventing this? Am I like, do I need to invent this or am I feeling insecure about something? I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to be careful. But man, sometimes when the kids, and when I say the kids, I mean, nieces and nephews or whatnot, come at me with stuff, I'm like, man, I can explain to you how Instagram works.
Exactly.
You explain that?
Exactly.
Come on.
Oh yeah. Well, but then our society though, like, I mean, come on, look at all the stuff that we have at our fingertips.
Yeah.
Just the amount of privilege that us as a society that we have. I mean,
you're nailing it. It's the digital nativism. Like if you grew up speaking a language and you never learned another language, to bring this back to language, you're not going to appreciate the intricacies of how your brain works around language.
Right.
But if you come to it fresh, so if you reach fluency like I did at age 20, I had an appreciation of what that took to get there. And those of us who did not grow up digitally native understand the journey, whereas the kids who grew up digitally native, like my son, it's just part of his life. It's like an arm.
It is. And then there's always somebody to support you through understanding that glitch or something is, but actually for me now being in tech, and being able to work on things in a way that I never even thought I would be able to have access to, or, like, you don't know that I didn't even know that I could break into a career like that,
Right.
I mean, I was one of those people. It's like, why is my computer running? So I'd call my brother and be like banging the computer. Like, what is happening?
Banging is always the right move.
Yeah, it's the way to fix things. Yes. But now it's completely, I am the one that is helping everyone else with their, and it's the thing is there has to be a willingness, but do you think that, I mean, definitely there's that society of privilege. What does privilege look like in the kind of corporate environments or the startup spaces or any spaces that, especially when it comes to DEI, like, is that a buzzword or is it just, or is there something of value add,
Is privilege a buzzword?
No, DEI, I'm saying.
Oh, wow. Okay. So look, DEI, the reason I kind of got on this bandwagon about maybe 25 years ago was because I had an instinct that I needed, and at the time it was a gender gap. I needed more women on my team. And it wasn't an easy way to do it back then. And nevertheless, when I managed to do it, when I managed to get more women on my team, I noticed the team functioned better. And then I left one corporate job and went to another. I was at Ernst & Young, and we had this, we were like 16 of us jammed into this conference room coding. And there were only maybe like 3 Americans in that room. We used to call it the United Nations. And I noticed that it was so much fun and we got so much done. It was so quick. And I started to realize, like, I bet diverse teams are more productive. And then the science came out, like, was it 7 or 8 years ago? The science came out saying, yep, turns out the more diverse your team is, the more productive it's going to be. So I was like, all right, well, the science is out. And now that the science is out, there is no CEO of a public company in the world that is not going to pay attention to that for profitability. You can call it whatever you want. You can ban whatever you want, but they're going to be like, you know what? I need to pay attention to this. I need to have a diverse team because I need profits. Period. The end.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. You know? And so anytime there are a couple topics like that where anytime I need to know what's going on, I look to CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, like climate change, for instance.
Mhm.
I'll look for this. I look at the CEOs of like major auto companies because they can't screw around.
Right.
They have global supply chains that have to work.
Right.
Like there's 30,000 parts that go into a car, and most of them aren't made in the U.S. They have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so they can't screw around.
Yeah.
So if like shipping lanes are changing, they're going to change quickly. So DEI is just one of those things where I'm like, call it whatever you want, get upset about wherever you want, but people that are like beholden to a profit will be doing whatever they can to maximize that profit, including having diverse teams.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. And especially now with these tariffs coming up, we have some interesting situations when it comes to what's going to make things tick. So
Isn't that interesting? I know about you, but I'm not tariff literate, but I'm getting there.
no, exactly. Things that matter, and we need to learn about them.
I'm like, man, should we, because, we always have like QA devices, and I'm like, should we be getting new QA devices like right now?
Yeah.
Because I know Apple's figuring it out, and Samsung is probably screwed right now. So I don't know. It's very strange.
Well, Apple is on the dip right now, so
It is. But also like they're like, they can't charge $2,000 for their entry phone. They can't,
no,
right?
no,
They can't do that.
no. But oddly, like everyone in Africa has one. Like, it's just like people are making ways there. They will find, I mean, there was this interesting, I think there was one of the when the Pope was kind of appointed, not this past time, but before it was. I mean, so far we've had it about, at least in my lifetime, twice I've seen. I don't know what happened. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. But there was a Time magazine, picture of people watching, him get appointed, and people were just watching. And then later, after the advent of these like Apple phones, the next image was the same, and it was everybody holding up a smartphone. I think they were holding up candles in one and a smart, and the society has completely changed, So, I mean, I think that digitally, but then in terms of companies and, the inclusion that they're providing or whatever, or however, is it real versus performative? I mean, where are we at with that, do you think?
I mean, it's really hard to know what's performative and what's not. I think on the performative side of DEI, I really don't know. Honestly, like I don't run these big companies, so it's hard for me to say. I'm an eternal optimist, so I tend to I tend to naturally see the positive of a thing. So I really don't know. Like before it was called before we even called it DEI in my company, like for me it was all about hiring practices, and I'll give you a good example. So it was about hiring practices, and I would always look out onto the team and say, all right, what's missing? We need to hire this kind of person next. And anybody who was my director of tech, I would tell them as they were coming into the job, I do this. Are you going to be pissed off by this, or is this okay with you? And I always got buy-in, luckily. But then what was brought to my attention was that we had people that were at our company since the beginning. And when new people would come in, like they would feel excluded because of like inside jokes or whatever, like everyone kind of knew each other. So an example of kind of like watching and learning and being aware, I decided, well, you know what? And this is me patting myself on the back. This is just kind of me being aware, situationally aware. I was like, all right, this is one thing I can take care of, is making sure someone feels like they've got something here that others might not have. So a new person would come into the company. I would schedule a half-hour meeting a week with them. This was in Zoom time, so during the pandemic. And we just talk a half hour every week. And sure, it worked perfectly because within like 2 meetings, I'd come into a meeting with a whole bunch of people and that new person would like sling an inside joke at me. And I'd be like, there it is. There it is. They feel like they belong.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think that your humor, and we were talking about humor before, and then certain anxieties when it comes to performing, especially like that improv class that you were talking about, and then when it's there, right? So it seems like in the workspace, you've definitely got something humorous going on. Would you say that that's the case?
I mean, sure. For me, it's a coping mechanism and a defense mechanism. When I've discovered, when I got a coaching certificate, I discovered that one of my superpowers is being able to see a person holding conflicting viewpoints together at the same time.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I can use that. Like that triggers my humor thing, and I go off on that.
Do you think that that is a point where someone then wants to transition, like they're holding on to these, older belief systems that they think, and then later on, kind of like they're kind of, transitioning into some kind of like open mind? Is that a hand-holding situation for you?
Yeah, that is astute observation. I don't know. That's amazing, insightful. Yeah, that's interesting. And like if I'm working with somebody at a coaching level, that is a transformative thing. If I'm not working with somebody at a coaching level, if I'm working with somebody who's a client and they're doing that thing, I'm trying to figure out like what is going on there. And trying to point it out in a way that's not going to shut down the conversation or make anybody anxious.
Right.
That's very insightful. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's very impressive, at least with the coaching to that degree, I would say, the amount of recognition when it comes to the ideas that you're professing. What kind of coaching do you do?
So I got certified in laser focus coaching.
Okay.
That's what it's called. It's a framework. So there's a bunch of different frameworks.
Are you just effing with me? Or?
No.
Oh, okay. Because
why did you back off?
Because I told you.
Why did you back off? Well, it's an actual framework. It's called laser focus coaching.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting. All right.
Yeah, and there's a whole structure to the intro conversation, and then setting up like the goal over a 45-minute period of a session.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, that's something that's interesting. I'd want to know more about that. So now let's transition into your personal life, specifically family life. I mean, this I'm sure is a massive portion of kind of just understanding. And we're drawing two parallels here because I think that at least in your journey as an entrepreneur and then being able to see kind of like all of these different nuances in a person's existence, behave at work, right? Like what they're being exposed to and what they're putting out. How did, having a transgender child, like when did you walk us through kind of like your first experience where I think it registered that maybe something is different here and, I need to learn more.
Yeah. I mean, basically he sat me down and said, this is what I am.
Yeah.
And he did, I think it was probably 14 or 15 when he first started. And there was, and I know a lot of kids that went through this phase not a phase, but basically these transitionary stages mentally where he identified as non-binary for a while.
And please tell me what that, because I think that, and terminology is very important here because I think, we want to be respectful. And I've had this conversation with you where I don't think people are particularly trying to get it wrong. It's and coming from a place of humility, like I think a lot of people just don't know. And so it's like, talking to your grandpa who is probably going to say something, dated to someone that might, like it's I've experienced that before. It's like
I'm struggling. I want to not be that person.
Yeah, well, but we're trying, right? So long as it's your intention, right? Like, so non-binary,
right? Yeah, so non-binary is not identifying as one gender or the other.
Okay.
So once again, it comes back to identity. Like, do I identify as male or female?
Okay.
And what's funny is that when we're looking back at when I was a kid, there was a time where I remember that my dad did that stupid thing where if you kiss your elbow, you become a girl. You've ever heard that?
I've never heard that, but I've been trying to kiss my elbow.
You like physically can't do it, right? And I think that's part of the parental scam back in the 70s. I don't even know where that came from, but he said that, and I was trying like crazy to do it. and it's funny because like anytime somebody like called me a man, I kind of like got really uncomfortable with that. And I remember distinctly like being like 15, 14, and just being uncomfortable. And I was a short, overweight kid. Totally. I looked the nerd part like so perfectly without any of the intelligence to back it up. Um, and and once again, I think, man, if I had grown up today, what would that look like? Like, I just, because there was no framework for that, and I just figured out my life and went on. But I think, there was I think there's a period of awakening that some kids go through that where they don't identify with one gender or the other, and that's non-binary, and that that may actually be their state.
Okay.
And they prefer the pronouns them, they.
Okay.
And it's funny because I've had some people say, well, how do you we don't have that construct in English. And I'm like, you do. If somebody's a jerk to you on the road, if somebody cuts you off in a car and you can't see who they are, you say
yeah,
they.
exactly.
You say
yes,
they.
exactly.
If you don't know the gender of somebody, you say they.
Yeah.
It's instinctive.
Yeah. So, okay, and these are just my questions that I also think that a lot of people might have as well. What's Z and Zer?
That I don't know.
Okay, because I was like,
I know that
what?
different languages have, like German has three gender pronouns.
Mhm.
I think it's probably impolite to call somebody an it.
Okay, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I think Z might have been like one of the German attempts at that.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I think that's my instinct.
Okay, so all right, so that's so. What if somebody is not identifying as non-binary? If you want to be polite, is it okay to say they across the board?
I mean, normally people will tell you what their pronouns are.
Okay.
If it's important to them, they'll tell you that.
Okay.
If they feel safe, they'll tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
So like we hired somebody who was they them,
Mm-hmm.
and it was part of the hiring process.
Okay.
Maybe it's also it was also good that, or also I guess a signal of a safe space that most of us had our pronouns in our Zoom titles.
Okay.
But getting back to my son, when he's figuring everything out, he started out non-binary, and then he wanted to go by he, him.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this was, a good 10, 11 years ago. It was all brand new.
Right.
Like it wasn't as prevalent as it is now.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that as parents, I think I was mentioning to you is that sometimes like it's like it's not that you are opposed to a certain kind of way of life. It's just that you don't want to watch your kids struggle, It's a difficult, just because it's hard for them to understand. I mentioned you mentioned in the 80s what it was like to be gay, and now it's very, very different, And so now, at least in terms of being transgender, they're having kind of that experience. I said I don't know if I said it right. Did I say it right? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm just, it's just something to be aware of. So I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And then also so LGBTQ plus, is that the right word, or are there other letters that I'm not
There's
sure?
A. So there's LGBTQA plus.
What's that mean?
A?
Yeah.
Asexual.
Oh, asexual. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So, so tell me, so now he sat you down.
Mm-hmm.
Were there inklings before this, or thoughts that you might have had that, like, okay, I guess that makes sense. Like, I saw this before. Now I understand.
Well, honestly, no, because like he was never he wasn't a girly girl at all.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of a rough and tumble kid.
They call the tomboy.
Yeah,
is that what they're?
It wasn't really a tomboy.
Mm-hmm.
He was just kind of like a neutral
Mm-hmm.
kid,
Mm-hmm.
Had Buzz and Woody and the Toy Story toys,
Mm-hmm.
but didn't really, to me anyway, in my memory, didn't skew one way or the other.
Right.
So while it came to a shock to me, it was mostly because it wasn't even on my radar at the time. Wasn't even paying attention that closely.
Right. So how has your perspective shifted now? Kind of now having him now, like his life is out there, and you are. I think that there are learning curves to a lot of different things.
Still,
can you walk us through that? Like, what are maybe your first learning curve, or something? Like the things that, at least how you're at. The reshaping of like your perspective on identity.
Yeah. So one of the So one of the things I do when I need to learn about something or when I want to uh, strengthen my empathy muscle is I will steep myself in that media world. So podcasts, TV shows, movies, books, and in this case, one of the early influences I had was an actor called named Asia Kate Dillon,
Hmm.
who was Taylor on Billions. Have you ever watched Billions?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Taylor on Billions. And they had this like amazing way of framing gender identity versus sexuality.
Hmm.
Gender identity is in your head, and sexuality is your sexual component.
Hmm.
And that was very enlightening to me. And then I would read their blogs and follow them on Instagram when I was on Instagram. And like once again, I just like steep myself in that media landscape to just watch how this happened and
Right.
watch what it was like. And I still screw up. My and I and it's much to the and it just makes me feel so terrible as a parent. It there are certain excitement levels in my brain, and they're either triggered by anxiety or stress, um, where my brain will just default to old knowledge.
Hmm.
And we were traveling in Hong Kong. One of the times it happened a lot was we were traveling in Hong Kong. I don't know the language. And I can't read the language.
Right, right, yes.
But I'm the dad.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And we had my son and his roommate with us, and it just kept slipping out. I was like, oh, this is not good. Like we're all stressed out, and I'm adding to the stress.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Wait,
just,
what kept slipping out? Like
wrong pronoun.
the wrong pronoun. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly know that it's important to be respected. But I think that people understand intent too.
Well, and that was kind of like when I say that I steep myself in in all the media.
Mhm.
One of the things I learned is, and this kind of goes across all cultural nuances and faux pas. Acknowledge it, apologize, and move on.
Yeah.
And the apology is actually a little tricky because, like, I don't necessarily need to be forgiven,
Mhm.
but you need to know that that was not
Yeah,
intentional.
right.
You know,
Yeah, for sure. When something is not on your radar,
That's
you're trying to
exactly it.
understand
Yeah.
the scope of it then,
Yeah.
and then just being able to understand the scope. So now, like, as basically there's certain evolutions in kind of now at least getting the pronouns correct, were there other things that were kind of inclusive of you now, like, kind of embracing this new change?
Um, I really don't know. It's an interesting question.
Like, how about when you go out, or
Yeah.
maybe having to tell other families, or maybe the first time you had to tell maybe, somebody that, somebody else, like how, I mean, of course you're supportive, right?
Yeah,
We love our children, you
yeah.
know,
Family. I think family was the diciest bit because so I'm 57. When he came out, it was probably I was probably about 40. So, my parents were in their 70s or, late 60s, early 70s back then. And so this is that kind of, what do you call it? Going from fixed mindset,
mhm,
like hitting a certain age, and the crystallized fixed mindset comes
mhm,
into play.
mhm.
And I was worried about that. I was worried like, oh man, here it comes. Like, am I going to be judged as a parent? Is this going to be my fault? I want to protect him.
Right.
I don't know like who's going to say what.
Mhm.
Overall, 100% positive.
That's good.
Almost 100%. I mean, I'm sure like on the surface it was 100% positive. I'm sure like, there's some like rumblings that I never heard of.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things when I remember my dad and I were talking about this one day, and it was extremely moving. I thanked him for, being as conscientious as he was being and getting it right.
Mhm,
It was
mhm,
amazing.
Right.
He was like, back in my day, if somebody were going through this, their life would be at stake. Like we would worry about them taking their life. And that hit me hard. I was
Yeah.
just like, yeah, okay, wow, he really gets it.
Yeah. That's painful. Like, I felt that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's really hard. I mean, and I'm sure that there have been a lot of instances, and I only ask because I think a lot of times people are too afraid to ask. I'm sure there's things that you might have experienced as a result that weren't so pleasant. Are there certain things, or perhaps maybe certain day-to-day things in life, or things side eye? Somebody like what are there certain things that hurt, where it's like, why is this like this?
I not that I can recall. We've been pretty fortunate in that I haven't seen any of that, and he hasn't told me about any of that. And now, could it be that he just never told me? Sure, it could be that. We have a pretty good communication relationship, so honestly, I don't know for sure. I will say that he went to an art college down in Savannah, Georgia. So like, it's freaky liberal, right? He lives in Chicago, freaky liberal, right? So, if he's been fortunate enough to live in and travel in circles that kind of value diversity and anonymity as well. Like being in a big city, like all of us who live in this city kind of enjoy a certain amount of anonymity, except for me, because I stand out like a sore but there's that anonymity, and then there's that like natural diversity. Or neighborhoods are gentrified, yes, but at the same time, like I can walk down the street and hear like maybe 6 or 7 different languages. That's crazy.
Yeah, no,
that's cool.
Yeah, I think certainly that's the case. I think it's nice to be able to be in an environment, and it's good to choose that kind of environment as well. Where it's like places that you feel comfortable and welcome. So this is like something I think that maybe people are curious about. So, please forgive me if it sounds, I don't know, ignorant. I just don't know. But in terms of like, say, for example, dating, not that and you can, if however comfortable you feel with sharing, whatever it is. But like, I know you mentioned that your son's getting married, which is really exciting.
Got married almost 7 weeks ago now.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, yeah. Doesn't matter what, that is an adjustment.
Well, it's so funny because like I asked him, in fact, I just took him to lunch 2 weeks ago, and I was like, well, how's married life? And he's like, no different really.
Yeah.
It's more different.
Do they live together?
Yeah, they live together. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was more different for me because like my son-in-law, like I've always been very fond of my son-in-law. And he fits right in, and he was part of the family super quick. And the mental shift for me was I felt that paternal protectiveness about him all of a sudden.
Yeah.
That I didn't feel before.
When you are trans, right? That's your sexual preference, or people that you're attracted to isn't necessarily having to be I mean, you could be bisexual.
All right. So yeah, I know.
Please explain, because I don't understand.
I know what you're kind of like dancing around.
Well, what am I dancing around? Because I still don't know even what I'm asking. I'm just confused.
No, it was something that I was not obsessed with, but something I kept pondering. Like, well, wait a second. If you're a trans man, does that mean you're attracted to women or men? And like, how does that?
Yeah.
What is that like? And I don't know if I was obsessed about it, but I thought a lot about it. I'm like, gosh, I don't even know what this looks like. And, because I'm worried about my kid. I want them to find love and all this stuff. And what I love about Gen Z is that they're just so, by and large, they're just very accepting and very fluid in who they are and who they want to be, to the point where they don't really care who you are from a relationship standpoint. They're attracted to the person, by and large.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's fascinating to watch. I just think it's fascinating.
So that's okay. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So your son is also is married to someone that is also has the he him pronouns.
Actually, I think he goes by they him.
Okay, all right. So they
okay.
So now that just got confusing.
Yeah.
I would like to understand.
Yeah. So
I didn't even know that was the case.
So if somebody goes by they, him, or maybe it's he, they, he, them. If somebody's mixing the non-binary or non-gender and gendered pronouns, what they're doing is they're showing allyship.
Okay.
So they're saying, I identify as he, but also I know and appreciate the other gender or non-binary. It's a sign of allyship.
Okay. Is it okay to then, it would not be, it's if you're trying not to offend anybody, can you just say they, them? At least initially until they correct you?
Would you have walked up to me the first time we met and said they, them?
I probably
Really?
would. Yeah, because I'm not sure. And I think, at least for me, I thought that was the way of not making a mistake. But if I'm wrong, then please correct me, because I don't understand.
I would wait. I would have somebody tell you.
Okay.
And I would assume that until you're told, you can probably do whatever feels right.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it wrong, you'll get corrected and accept the correction. If you're at an event and somebody's got a name tag on and they've got, the name tag's got the pronouns on it, just, respect that. But I think that you don't need to live in fear of that.
Okay.
You just need to live in acceptance of what may come.
I see. Okay. There are times where I've accidentally gotten someone's pronouns wrong, and then someone told me a little bit too meanly. Like,
Sure.
because,
Yeah.
But how am I supposed to know?
Well, think about it this way. I'm sure living the life you've lived, you have run across microaggressions.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you're walking down the street, you're walking to work, and you've experienced like a dozen little microaggressions.
It builds up.
It builds up, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The last person to say something to you that sets you off.
Yeah.
They didn't do it to set you off, and it wasn't extreme, but it built on all those little aggressions that you experienced getting up to that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what,
We're
that's
human beings at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And people have feelings. You're right.
Also, maybe even hyper anxious about being in the world. Period.
Yeah. That's very true. And I think that there's also constant judgment, right? It's like, you have to be strong enough to be able to identify and come out that way to the public,
Which is huge. Which is huge.
Huge.
Nothing I've even had to come close to doing.
I mean, and it's also kind of like a consistent battle too,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, for example, I grew up, I wore a hijab. I started very young. And I remember I grew up in a place where not a lot of people were wearing it. I just felt like I was always being judged for my appearance, more so being judged to be the emblem of a religion rather than the 9-year-old that I was. It's like a human being that just, wants to play and just, wants to just laugh and not be so serious all the time. And I think that at that age, perhaps I didn't even understand it.
Sure. Right.
And I think that, so just drawing a parallel and not even, for anyone in the transgender community, I mean, so many people that are experiencing that I'm different, I'm somebody that perhaps maybe is not the conventional, some conventional individual that you might see, but standing for perhaps maybe like an idea, I mean, in terms of religion or that, being transgender or, being, homosexual or
well, that was going to be my point, actually. When you say something like conventional, it's just something that falls within the statistical norm, right? Mm-hmm. So if we look at homosexuality, people don't question whether or not it is in the statistical norm anymore. And people don't question whether or not it's conventional. Mm-hmm. But transgender being such a something that's new enough in its scale, it's not new with humanity.
Right.
It's new in its
being able to be recognized in terms of the law, And,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think when we're talking about, quote, conventionality, I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about society's acceptance of it as opposed to how frequently it occurs.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. But do you think that throughout history, though, there's always been, and the thing is, why don't we just learn our lessons, goddammit? Learn our lessons from history. There's always
Because
a marginalized community.
Yep.
And they're always going to face some format of resistance in difficult times. And eventually, I would say, I mean, do we ever feel seen and heard? I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we're human beings. I mean, what was accepted, race, we had so many things in this country alone. I mean, slavery and all of that, it's just, but are people ever treated equally? I don't know.
No.
Right? No, they're not.
They're not.
Yeah.
No. And that's where equitable comes from, right? Because equality can never be achieved. It needs to be equitable. And I think that's where a lot of this DEI pushback is coming in. Because in order to achieve equity, you sometimes need to give someone more than someone else.
Right.
And that looks like inequality,
right?
But it's actually equitable.
Right. I mean, like affirmative action, for example, and it's just, I remember there was a debate. I was in high school, and I was probably the only minority in the class. And, the topic was affirmative action. And for me, being a marginalized community, I was just like, well, yeah, I mean, I should probably be accepted to Harvard because, but in essence, I knew what it was like, that it was difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I'm perhaps not getting the same kind of opportunities in terms of tutoring and whatever,
right.
or,
And let's be honest, you still have to be accepted in a Harvard.
Yeah. I mean, Harvard was a bad example. That's not my goal. It never was. So,
but even like Harvard's not taking people just to take people.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You still gotta,
absolutely.
You still got to make it.
You still have to make it in there. Yeah. But then what happens if everyone's equal? Then they're looking for certain percentages or, I'm just saying is that, so my point is that most people don't understand, especially that other people, they've never walked in their shoes, so they don't know what kind of opportunity is unavailable to them by any means. Like having immigrant parents, for example, it's like just getting into college might be a big deal. Now then having all these Ivy League options is a completely different story and might not be accessible unless somehow it comes into your existence. But so what are your thoughts on that? Is that when it comes to equity, and then having like these kinds of opportunities that trying to kind of, our companies are doing it. I mean, nationally, should we be doing it in terms of education? Just in general, I mean, like where does it end? I mean, like the clique at school, right. Oh, you don't have somebody who has, red hair. So now you need to invite that friend over. Like, so I feel like where does it end trying to be equitable?
I mean,
or is that our human nature?
I think it's our human nature to be exclusive and to be to find our people and coalesce around our people. I think that's human nature. Right. Like our brains are little pattern recognizers, and we tend to gravitate those people who look and sound like us. Yeah. That's what happens. That's humanity. We breach those barriers by interacting with those who are outside of our, I don't know why, I'm trying not to say tribe. But
a tribe could be anything. I think that maybe people who value intelligent conversations, that could be your tribe. Doesn't matter what they look like, or you could be like maybe, in a shallow way. It's like, oh, you need to be making this much. That's your tribe. But that maybe it's not shallow. I mean, you want to be able to maybe not feel bad about having certain things, or I don't know. Depends on what your tribe is and what's important to you.
If we look at history of people in power versus marginalized people who are kept out of power, there will always be people in that marginalized community that are more qualified to do things than the people in power, right? Like the dominant whatever. And the only way that you can rectify that is through conscious programs to kind of make sure that we're looking at the equitable nature of these people, and make sure that this brilliant kid from a marginalized community is getting a leg up so they can go and cure cancer, let's say,
Yeah.
and the moron in charge right now can't cure cancer and needs to move out of the way.
I think, it's definitely, there's a lot of intricacies that are involved. So what are you seeing more clearly now than ever in terms of maybe how you've evolved in your life?
It's all interconnected. Early in our conversation, you had alluded to the parallels between having a family and having a company, and the thought popped into my head is like, having a teenager, having a 16-year-old living at home and having a staff of, Gen Z or young people. Like, wow, it was so similar.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And learning how to regulate your emotions around both settings, as an owner and as a parent. But there are so many similarities to family life and to running a business, that I think one of the things that gave me permission to be who I was a book, and I think you and I talked about this, called Give and Take by Adam Grant. And in that book, he talks about the I'm losing it now, servant leadership. And servant leadership is about being there for your people and being of service to your team. And it clicked for me. That's the kind of person. I was never a top-down leader. I was never an authoritarian, do this now, do this now, do this now. I was always let's figure out what we're going to do together. Let's figure out what makes the most sense, even when it comes to deadlines. And that book kind of gave me permission to be that kind of leader. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, that's kind of how I am in my life too. And it all kind of started getting connected. And I used to kind of treat them separate, like work and home, and now I don't. Now I'm the same person. If you meet me at home and you meet me at work, I'm the same person.
Yeah.
And that wasn't always the case.
Hopefully you're not wearing pajamas at work.
We'll never know.
So I have very much so enjoyed this conversation. Where can we reach you?
You can find us at 8pitstudios.com.
Well, we really appreciate having you. This has been a very insightful, and I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope to continue to learn more from you, because you have really, there's insights here that are important that a lot of people need to know. That they don't, and specifically kind of like they think that is the bar, I need to just company after company. This is what success looks like. But it's nice to get kind of like the internal view of what that actually looks like. So I appreciate you for being here and sharing your story with us. So thank you so much.
Back at you.